You're listening to another episode of Open Source CXO, the podcast designed to share insights on how to excel in your business using technology, regardless of the industry. Host Robert Kehoe is a self-taught software developer who has grown to the role of CEO. Renowned for his collaborations with organizations such as Stanford University, Nelnet, and Louis Vuitton, he continually seeks new challenges to conquer in the world of tech. Accompanying him is Don Blackburn, a veteran COO with over 25 years of experience in cultivating diverse relationships and driving innovation in various technical projects. Each week, they'll be sitting down with some of the nation's foremost technology leaders to develop an open source playbook, drawing from their firsthand experiences in the field. Let's talk some tech.
Today we're joined by Jim Poteet, who is in senior leadership over at Oracle Health, formerly Cerner.
Mm-hmm.
It's my understanding you've been at Cerner for a number of years. First, thank you for joining us. And second, why don't we talk a little bit about your role there?
Yeah, absolutely.
What you do.
Happy to be here. I've been with Cerner, now Oracle Health, for about 13 years. Two stints. Started in early 2000s and then rejoined 2013 after some entrepreneurial stuff here in the city. Currently, have a division of about 120 some odd software engineers across 4 different development centers, 2 in the U.S. and 2 in India. Working in really the financial side of healthcare from the standpoint. So leading the data analytics from the financial side, as well as health information management, which is a solution on, making sure all the medical coding is correct so that our clients can get paid for their services, which seems to be a pretty important task. Yeah, they like that from that standpoint. But beyond that, Oklahoma State guy, industrial engineering degree, cut my teeth at Accenture, worked in every industry except for healthcare and finance. And then after that, worked in healthcare and finance.
Now you got it all covered.
And so I've covered a lot
over
the years from that standpoint.
So how things changed over the last, what Oracle acquired Cerner?
Legally about a year ago.
Oh,
legally,
okay.
But the acquisition went through 18 months, 2 years ago.
Yeah. So how things changed for you?
Yeah. Oracle is really a Silicon Valley company, and they're really managed that way as well. Mm-hmm. And so how we manage projects at Cerner, culturally, it is probably 180-degree change, for all of us that are former Cerner. I think in a good way. Cerner was typically a product-driven company. Mm-hmm. We did a lot of things that clients asked us to do, whether it was correct for the product roadmap or not, to keep that revenue. Oracle is more of an engineering-driven company. Mm-hmm. So the entire leadership, went from product leading and driving engineering to engineering leading product and driving what we're doing.
Gotcha.
So it's not a structure that was new to me. It was just new in the past 10 years that I'd been working at Cerner.
Gotcha.
To do that. But what it does is it really focuses, on the product, the software patterns we use. Oracle Health and Oracle OCI has a very, very high security posture. So there's all types of reviews on every design, has to pass security protocols across the platform, so that when it gets out in the cloud, it's much higher than the other cloud platforms that I've worked with or worked for from that standpoint. So it's been a good change in some areas, but we have a lot of work to do. Yeah. And they remind us we have a lot of work to do.
How'd the culture change at all? Any kind of major shifts in culture? I know they're both, fairly sizable companies, so.
More Oracle is focused on more of a SaaS-based, implementation for our clients. And so I'd say that was probably our biggest shift, in how we manage software. Cerner, a lot of solutions that I work with and around, there was a lot of open source leveraged.
Okay.
A lot of companies do that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now there's we have a number of projects to use native OCI, cloud tech, reduce our reliance on open source. There's all types of security holes in that.
Sure.
From that standpoint, so it's a good transition.
Yeah.
From that way, and when you look at Larry Ellison made a big investment to get to the cloud, and they're probably the fourth. You have AWS and Azure and Google that's out there, and Larry Ellison hired a lot of the engineers that built AWS, and said, "Hey, come take build version 2 for me."
Right. Right.
So there's a lot of similarities, but it is, I believe, because of the security posture and the options that are available, it's just a much better platform and solution. So you're seeing a lot of uptick, with clients and the capabilities once we get all Cerner up there
Right.
are going to be great for the marketplace and for our clients.
Right. So the team you had prior to the acquisition is still the same team you had, or did you end up?
I've moved around a little bit.
Okay.
Right. So I returned to Cerner because I have high volume transactions experience. So I left Cerner, went to a kind of gift card company here in town. It's now called EML. Was bought. When you have gift cards the day after Christmas,
Yeah.
is huge. It was
Sure.
80% of the business flowed across. So we did a lot to make sure those systems were up and running. And I rejoined Cerner when they launched it's called Revenue Cycle. It's the financial side of healthcare into their clearinghouse business, which is medical claims, remit payments, credit card payments. So it's basically integration with third parties that provide all these services.
Sure.
And then 3 years ago, I was asked to go lead our data analytics team and our middle solutions, which HIM and clinical reporting, and there's a couple others.
So we had talked a little bit about how you manage teams worldwide, really, not just here in the States, and how that's kind of changed over the last few years, especially with COVID. But I thought that was kind of intriguing how you tackled that change from the walk around manager,
Right.
We talked about of being able to walk up to somebody's cube and talk to them, and then having to go totally remote, and then having to manage people overseas and so forth. Why don't you speak a little bit about that?
So there's a couple angles there. Managing people overseas. The biggest challenge is just context. Our engineering organizations in India, they have no way to understand the U.S. healthcare market.
That was going to be one of my questions. Was managing a team overseas like that, doesn't understand culture and healthcare and different things like that. How do you guys do that?
Yeah.
So
Very
interesting.
Yeah. So the key that I found is once we started building the teams and resources, myself as a senior leader, my product counterparts that help write requirements, for the first 2.5 years, we were over there every 6 months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we were connecting them to the work, to the business, asking questions. And then every quarter, we would have senior engineers that would go embed in their teams for at least 3 weeks to help them learn the software, what we're doing, how we're doing it, what are the patterns, all that.
I imagine it's also non-technical things as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
You're trying to teach them how things, things work, acronyms for various things. And so I imagine that it's really not, development-wise, I'm sure they're capable.
Right.
But it's learning everything else. So
Yes.
Do you find that it was, obviously there's a huge cost effectiveness in and having Indian development teams, and that's awesome. Do you find it worth it when you still have to go and manage them or teach them and train them and really kind of make sure they understand? Is it do you feel like it was worth it?
I do.
From I guess a business sense?
The opportunity, if you can get from the ground up and not only have influence, but have decision-making authority on who gets hired and why they're hired and why they're brought in. One of the things that I did that, there's a cultural difference in European education and U.S. education versus the Indian education. It's all good, but we all do different things. And so we found it could take, almost a year to get them in the right mindset, to develop how we develop. And, not to say there was a lack of creativity, because they become very creative as they get up this, learning curve on what you're trying to do from a business and on the technology side. And so what I did is I formed kind of a experimental team over there. So it was not anything that was on our roadmap, not anything that, it was, I had a use case using blockchain in healthcare. And
that sounds fun.
Yeah. And I was able to get a couple of master's engineering students that they hired. They have kind of an apprenticeship in India where you have to work for a year and then you get your master's. They joined the team. It was the current team that I had, but it was really the top talent there, and said, you know what, I'm going to define the use case, and we're going to kind of broad brush on what the technology is, and we're just going to iterate, and we're going to meet every 2 weeks. There's no timelines. It's whatever you can get done based on meeting your normal development schedule. Right. But we're going to sit and talk about this stuff. And I did a lot of kind of a preceding and leading them, not telling them how to design something, not telling them, it was like, here's a general paint by numbers. You got to fill in everything else, right? And we'll talk about it in 2 weeks. And so we just did that for about 9 months, ended up building a working prototype. When the engineers came over, we presented at a KC blockchain event. It's since been patented, the approach. I hope at some time it can be, fully implemented, because it kind of simplifies a lot of integration that goes on. But it was my way to challenge them, get them, over this what I felt was a creative, barrier. Sure. Because they're not here locally. They're not, they just don't get to experience that stuff. Right. And then as they learned the technology, what we were doing, and enough about the business, provide them this use case that we could solve many different ways. And, get into, at the time it was, blockchain was all the rage, and, it was going to solve a lot of problems.
How would you get leadership or stakeholder buy-in for, you mentioned that it was a project that technically wasn't on your development roadmap, so it wasn't critical to get done. You use it as a way to, I guess, connect with the team and teach them certain things. Yeah. Was it a process to get sort of stakeholder buy-in to get that approved?
No, because our roadmap stayed the same. We didn't take anything off the list. I was fortunate to be able to shape the team here in Kansas City. Had a very strong leadership. So what we do is we have a principal engineer, which is usually a senior engineer that stays at least 6 to 9 months ahead of the team, is building the tech strategy. When we have questions, we're doing POCs. And then I have an engineering leader that actually executes, right? And they work together. I kind of say the principal engineer is the first, second, and third inning pitcher.
Okay.
Right? And then the execution director comes in and takes it to the end of the ball game, right? Okay. And the model works very well. You name the system, I had it. We had mainframes, Stratus boxes, AIXs, C code, C++ code, Java code, we had it all, right?
Yeah.
And we had to get ourselves out of it. And so we used that structure to do it. And so while they were doing that, I had not free time, but I was working in the industry, working on, healthcare API groups, thinking about transaction processing, what can we do to cut the administrative costs out of healthcare? That's what the financial side is. Mm-hmm. How can you automate so that the docs can do what they need to do and not have to have all this administrative staff back here, right? And so this is where this kind of idea came up, and just my counterpart in India, because we had this kind of apprentice program and how we got engineers out of universities, we were able to kind of cobble this off as our own little project to, it's a source of pride for those engineers. Like they're doing something. It's they're learning technology. The day to day, they may not get the experience to do that. So that was, part of the equation.
Sure. To come out of college and get to do blockchain immediately. Yeah. I mean, that's
no kidding.
Who wouldn't be happy with that? I mean, that would be.
Well, that's every junior developer's dream is to get into something that they obviously feel proud of, but it's hard enough for, even juniors nowadays to find jobs, especially in the US, but no, that's really cool. Yeah. How do you measure that success is what I want to know. So you had this project. You did mention that you had a lead dev on it that was like 9 months out. Do you guys set milestones? Do you have some idea of they should be wrapping up this by any certain point? Like how would you measure? How would you know it's successful?
No, and this is part of the culture shift to Oracle. But at Cerner, we followed the SAFe methodology in the Agile process. So we would commit to 9 months. 3 months worth of work, basically. We have 2-week sprints. And so all the teams, we kind of outline, here are the 10 things we have to do. The teams will get together. They go, I can get 6 of them done in this 3 months, and we would work through that process. And so what we would do, there's kind of a layered strategy where myself, our execution director, and our principal engineer, we maintain a tech currency list. So all the software components that we'd have, what version it was in production, we track, is it being sunsetted? What do we need to do? Because we had IBM WebSphere, we had a whole bunch of stuff. If you don't keep up with that stuff, you get in trouble.
Randomly bite
so
you one day.
We had a list of that. That was part of the planning. Then we took, a swath through the architecture from a tech strategy roadmap and said, okay, what are we doing for tenant management? What's our component? Where are we at now? Where are we headed to? What's our application services? What's our data access services? And we had a kind of matrix of that and saying, well, this is where we're at today. And here are the next 3 things we need to do that to evolve to where we want to go down the road, right? And you took all that input plus any business requirements we had, that went into a roadmap. And we roadmapped that out over 6 months or 9 months. And then that would feed into 3-month execution. Right, and we had 11 teams, about 10 engineers per team. We divide that out and execute that. And also what we do as part of that tech strategy, you'd have those inputs, and then we would have, we'd write a white paper. And that white paper would basically have an executive summary, right? So those above us and around would know. And then we'd project a 2 to 4 year vision on each one of these components that we have listed out on what we need to go and where we need to go. That was distributed to every engineer at every level. They had the ability to provide their own input. They understood, okay, now I know where we're going and why we're going there. It also was a great document for upper management so that they would know, like, here's what we're doing, here's all we're weeding stuff in. And then it really allowed us to get buy-in from our product folks. Who didn't know all the details, but they understood, like, now I know why I need to prioritize, uplifting this service from a SOAP service to a REST service. Why it relates to my business and why it's important going forward.
Because nobody should be using SOAP.
That's right.
It's crazy to me, the level of management and planning that's needed for, obviously you guys are massive companies. There's lots of you have to consider, but even smaller projects that we get into, there's still planning that you have to do. And I don't think really people really kind of take that into account when building software a lot.
And when I talk about this tech strategy, it was all backed by a business case.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Right. And so, we couldn't do anything unless we had that business case that we knew. And even today, when you add up the dollars of these large teams, if you're not planning that way, you're not being judicious with your money and your client's money and all that. And it is vital for the success, of your organization from that. Because I've been on, I don't know how many projects that we spent millions. Mm-hmm. Right? And you get to the end and they're like, yeah.
Throw it away.
Oh, that's just
like,
for me to even think about.
What?
Right.
From that standpoint. So it's as a technician, it is vital to understand your business. I would say early on in my career, I was a tech junkie. I would bebop around the different companies like, oh, great power builder.
That's going back a long ways.
I know. It's object oriented.
Right.
Yeah, I got to be in that, right? And the next thing comes.
Shiny. It's so shiny, man.
SAP, ABAP. Like, we got to go. There's lots of money out there, right?
Wow. Okay.
And you go do that, and I realized I didn't know scratch about the business.
Yeah.
I was just all about the tech. And once I figured out, I've got to get engrossed in what the business does, how it works, how it needs to evolve. And then all of a sudden, tech side comes in to say, okay, here's how we can really impact that. And I feel confident in a lot of things we did at Cerner and now at Oracle Health. We're really benefiting the business and what our clients do because that's the approach we, really take. And I make sure that, my managers and directors and everyone else, that they really understand the business side, right?
Which is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's different organizations and different cultures, even in Kansas City, like the BATS organization, which is now CBOE, they don't have any product folks. Like their tech leads are their product folks, right? I mean, they're driving, stock trading, which is great, but
right.
It's very important.
Right. Yeah. It is. If you communicate that down to the, to the every level of what the ultimate goal is and what the end result needs to be, that's huge, regardless of the size of the project. I mean, same thing in our.
Now you were talked about earlier about the COVID.
Oh yeah, that was interesting how you handled that.
Yeah,
and the blogging and everything.
Yeah, so when the lockdown happened, right, and had teams, all over the world, and there was, every state had a different rule here, and different countries had different rules. Right. And my normal management strategy was, management by walking around. So I'd walk around, talk to developers, ask them what they're doing, tell them what I'm doing. All that went away. And we had a number of engineers and other roles that, weren't really doing very well, right? And not on immediate teams, but we lost some folks, through that process. And a lot of times when I traveled to India, I would blog, right? And I have an affinity for the British Soccer League, the Premier League, right? Yeah. So when I go to India, I'd stay over a day there and at Heathrow, and then I'd go to a match.
Okay. And
then when I was in India, they have a culture of you visit there, they want you to come back. So they take me to sites, on weekends. So I'd blog about it. Well, I just continued that during COVID. And I would blog about just normal, goofy things that everybody was feeling.
Right.
During that time. And then I would say, this is what we're doing in business. This is why it's important. And then I'd have some news items on there, to kind of end it off. And I started this, and then I did a lot of skip level one-on-ones with engineers about every quarter. I tried to spin around, talk to everyone, and just asking them like, hey, this is your 30 minutes. You can ask anything you want. And if you want to, talk about something else, we can.
Right.
And a lot of times we did, but others were, they were struggling with one thing or the other from that standpoint. And it kept us all connected, through that. And part of that, going through that process, I wrote a blog and became an author on Medium. And what I did is I related, I'm a small town boy from Oklahoma, 2 stoplight town with 2,500 people counting the cattle, from that standpoint. Yeah. And my family business was the funeral business. And so I made a correlation to what I learned about software engineering growing up in a funeral business, and use that as a blog, for my team to kind of relate. And so when I shifted to these new teams, I wanted them to understand what my mindset was as a software engineering leader and what was important. Because no matter how many times I could meet with them, they just, until they worked with me for 2 or 3 years, they wouldn't understand that. A lot of things we just talked about, are in that, from a philosophy standpoint.
Right. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant way for them to get to know you without
right
actually getting to know you, right? I mean,
Right.
it's just go back and read the blog.
Yeah.
So how often were you putting this out? Is this a weekly?
Depend on, when code first started, it may be every couple months, it then went to, every 6 months, from that standpoint. But, as events change, I would, do something like, I'm from Oklahoma, my English is Oklahoma English, right? I go back to see family. And so I had a conference call and I had to stop right outside Ponca City, Oklahoma, I-35, and there's three truck stops. And so I went to all the truck stops and took pictures of what you could buy in a truck stop in Oklahoma.
Okay. That's part of your blog?
That's part of my blog that went out.
That's actually kind of neat.
Right. So, T-shirts, and you can imagine hunting, all kinds of stuff, right?
Oh, you bet.
But across the world, right, it's nothing that they would experience at all, right?
Right. Even other parts of the country.
Right.
It's going to be
say,
different.
Here's
Seem unusual.
Here's a little bit about me, and by the way,
and where I came from.
Here's the funny stuff you can find. It's for sale.
So what was your team's response to your blog? Like, what did they? Most blogs you can comment and stuff, or I'm sure you guys have like a chat based system. Did they bring it up often, or what was the response that you got from
it depended. It was more on one-on-ones.
Oh, okay.
When I had the one-on-ones, they were like, hey, I read this. I got a question about this. Depending, we had kind of infrequent kind of town halls when we had direction shifts and all that. Most of them did respond back and just say, hey, I was kind of struggling today. This help me understand where we're at, and I like the funny stuff you put in, or whatever.
Sure.
Conversation starters too. That's great.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's good.
Yeah.
Been a good time.
Yeah.
No, this was great.